Hello and welcome to the She Reads Romance Books podcast, the ultimate show for romance book lovers looking for the best books worth reading. I'm your host, Leslie Murphy, and in each short episode, I share my favorite book list of recommendations so you know exactly what to add to your must-read list. Join me as I explore the romance genre and have fun collecting book boyfriends along the way, because life is better with a love story. Hello, readers! Today is a very, very special day, and I am so happy that you're joining me for this episode because it is episode number 50, if you can believe it. I started this podcast just a few months ago, hoping to share my book recommendations in a different medium so that you could listen to episodes while you commute to work or cook dinner or clean your house or apartment. It's also kind of allowed me to infuse, I guess, a little bit more of my personality into the list versus just online, which has been really fun too. It's been a blast writing and creating podcast episodes, and I really hope that you've been enjoying them. And I thought that since this was a momentous number, that I would use it to talk about some of my favorite romance books of all time, because I can't believe I haven't talked about those yet. But before I get to this list, do me a favor, either right now or at the end of this episode, would you really do me a solid and write a review on Apple Podcast or wherever you are listening? I would really, really love to get to 50 reviews to mark this 50th episode, and it would really only take 1 minute max, really. But it would make a world of difference to me and the podcast. And it would help me to know if you'd like me to continue on with 50 more episodes. So thank you so much in advance. That would be really awesome if you wouldn't mind doing that for me. I also want to take a moment to welcome my inaugural members who have joined the She Reads Romance Books book club, which is now live and open to join. So exciting. First up to join was Shauna. Shauna, thank you so much. It was so great to see your name pop up as soon as my email went out. And I also saw Karen sign up right away. You two have been so much fun to chat with online, and now we can do so virtually in the club. So excited. And I'm also happy to have Janie and Caroline, Judy and Adriana, to name a few. So if you haven't joined yet, please hop on over and join us. I'd love to see you there, and you can learn more about the book club. If you're not familiar with it or sure what's involved, you can just click on the link in the show notes and check it out. But as I mentioned, I wanted to take the time to talk about some of the best romance books of all time in this episode. Now, I should probably say, when I say best of all time, it's clearly not scientifically sound that I have been able to read the billion or so romance titles that are available and compare each and every one to come up with the list of the best. So I haven't read a billion, but I have read quite a few romance books, probably thousands even. I'm not really sure the total number. And the ones that I label the best of all time are the books that are clear 5-star reads for me, obviously. But not every 5-star read for me makes this list, kind of, to be honest. The ones to make my best of all time list have that just, I don't know, special extra something and are definitely books that I have already reread, perhaps multiple times, or would see myself rereading time and time again. So for today's episode, I'm going to share really just a few of my favorites. If you want to know all of the romance books that I consider the best of all time, then you can check out my list on shereadsromancebooks.com. It's pretty easy to locate up in the top menu under books. You can find them all there. I continually update it. I recently just did update it. And I even have a PDF document of all of the titles that are on that list that you can download and then kind of work your way through it by checking them off once you've had a chance to read them. As I said, I just updated this PDF, so be sure to head over. Let's see, I should also say that these are some of the best romance books of all time up to this point of the episode, right? But with that said, let's just dive in and talk about some of these books. The ones I'm sharing today, as I said, are all 5-star reads, but the ones I kind of picked to talk about in this episode have just a little something special about them that I wanted to share and talk about that really made them stand out on the list when I was sort of trying to decide which ones I wanted to highlight. If I've actually already highlighted them on the podcast just in a previous episode because they're so good, I'll kind of note which ones so you can go back and listen to it after this episode. So I won't really go into too much depth about those books here, but for those that I haven't talked about yet on the podcast, I'll share a little bit more about them and why they have made this list. So if you've been following me for a while, you probably know which book I have to mention first. And that is Paradise by Judith McNaught. If ever there's an opportunity to mention this book, I will. This is the book that hooked me on my love of the genre, and it's one that I've reread so many times because I love it so much. It is this epic second chance romance with an opposites attract love story that I honestly never tire of because McNaught wrote this fascinating story, really, about a department store heiress and the boy from the opposite side of the tracks who grew up to become this corporate takeover and who wanted to bury the family business of the woman who broke his heart. I have talked about this book on the podcast in episode 17 on the best snowed in romance books because there is this pivotal scene where Meredith and Matthew are snowed in together when the past is finally dredged up and miscommunications are righted. It was just a pivotal and amazing scene in the book, but this is hands down one of my most favorite romance books and one that I definitely consider the best of all time. It's just vintage Judith McNaught. So if I haven't convinced you yet and all the time that you've been following me, now is the time to read it. And while I'm on the topic of Judith McNaught, I have to say that Kingdom of Dreams is also one of the best romance books of all time. I recently just talked about this book in episode 44 that highlights the best historical romance novels. Kingdom of Dreams is another book that I've reread multiple times because it really did make me fall for historical romance, which is why I'm sort of quickly mentioning it again here. It took me back into just this different time, where women weren't necessarily regarded as equal, but Jennifer, she's only 17 at the start of this book, and she stands up to Claymore more often than not in this book. It's the perfect enemies to lovers romance where the heroine is abducted but falls for her arrogant alpha captor. It is so good. So again, on the Judith McNaught train, check out Kingdom of Dreams or listen to that episode to learn more about it. Another one of my favorites in a romance I consider the best of all time is Drive by Kate Stewart. And I should say I have no particular order of these books. These were just ones that I kind of thought of and wanted to highlight. So just FYI on that. I love so many of Kate's books, but this one always rises to the top. And I talked about it in podcast episode 28 on unputdownable books because once you start reading it, you're just instantly hooked and you can't put it down until you find out who Stella picks, because this is a love triangle romance, which you can catch more of in podcast episode 31. The love triangle trope, it can cause me a lot of angst sometimes, but if it's done well, it's just so good. And this one is one of the best. I loved that Stella was such a spitfire and went her dream of becoming a music reporter. But I honestly, didn't know while reading it if she was going to end up with Reed, the hot drummer, or Nate, the hot newspaper editor. I,
developed my favorite and suspicions, but it was such a gripping love story with ups and downs that really showed Stewart's writing chops, in my opinion. Now, another one of Kate Stewart's books that I have to mention is The Guy in the Middle, which is one of her new adult sports romance books. It's about Lance, the hero. He is a college football player turned boxer, and how he falls for the football coach's daughter. This is one of those books that honestly has stayed with me for so long after finishing reading it for the first time. I honestly still to this day remember the scene in the book that takes place outside of this bar in the conversation Lance had with Harper and the vulnerability of that moment. I mean, I've read so many books since then, but still, I can just vividly remember the scene that makes this such a great book and one of the best of all time. But it could have also been why I love it, because it's about Harper's struggles and how she was sort of considered the ugly duckling of the story. But Lance, I think at one point says that she's an 11 on a scale of 1 to 10, which I absolutely loved. These two characters really just hit home for me in this book. And I love to see the progression of not only their lives, but their love story, which is why I put it on my list of best romance books of all time. The next book that I think is one of the best of all times is The Edge of Never by J.A. Redmersky. This was the first book I read by this author, and man, did it pack a punch. I don't think I've talked about this book yet on the podcast, so here is what it's about. 20-year-old Cameron Bennett had always been one to think out of the box, who knew she wanted something more in life than following the same repetitive patterns and growing old with the same repetitive life story. And she thought that her life was going in the right direction until everything fell apart. Determined not to dwell on the negative and push forward, Cameron is set to move in with her best friend and plans to start a new job. But after an unexpected night at the hottest club in downtown North Carolina, she makes the ultimate decision to leave the only life she's ever known far behind. With a purse, a cell phone, and a small bag with a few necessities, Cameron, with absolutely no direction or purpose, boards a Greyhound bus alone and sets out to find herself. What she finds is a guy named Andrew Parrish, someone not so very different from her and who harbors his own dark secrets. But Cameron swore never to let down her walls again, and she vowed never to fall in love. But with Andrew, Cameron finds herself doing a lot of things she never thought she'd do. He shows her what it's really like to live out of the box and to give in to her deepest, darkest desires. On their sporadic road trip, he becomes the center of her exciting and daring new life, pulling love and lust and emotion out of her in ways she never imagined possible. But will Andrew's dark secret push them inseparably together or tear them completely apart? Oh my gosh, you guys, this book should have been, honestly, on my Ugly Cry episode, which I think was episode 1, if I remember. It is such a captivating new adult romance that, you know, as I said, starts with Cameron, who just ups and boards a Greyhound bus, picking a random location just because she needs to get away. I could really sympathize with her because her life is just going off the rails. And sometimes distance is all that can really help you come back to yourself, right? So then Andrew boards the bus, and oh my God, these two, I loved how they slowly got to know each other as they traveled across the country and slowly fell hard. But then the book turns to Andrew's point of view, and that's when my heart just about burst out of my chest. I can't really say more about this book without giving some major spoilers, and I really don't want to do that because you just have to go into it kind of blind or without knowing more about that book summary. But it's definitely one of the best of all time. It's amazing. And it's also one of those books that I just randomly picked up based on, I think, maybe a Goodreads review. I'm not really sure. And it set me on this course of really just branching out to new authors that I'd never heard of or never tried before. And I haven't looked back since on doing that. And so that's why I wanted to highlight this one today. Definitely go and read it. All right, the next book that I consider one of the best of all times, you've probably read it, super popular, is Him by Serena Bowen and Elle Kennedy. This book might have been my first romance. I can't really say for sure, but it sure stands out as the one that made me fall for this category of romance. And here's what it's about if you haven't read it. Jamie Canning has never been able to figure out how he lost his closest friend. 4 years ago, his tattooed, wisecracking, rule-breaking roommate cut him off without an explanation. So what if things got a little weird on their last night of hockey camp this summer they were 18? It was just a little drunken foolishness. Nobody died. Ryan Wesley's biggest regret is coaxing his very straight friend into a bet that pushed the boundaries of their relationship. Now with their college team set to face off at the national championship, he'll finally get a chance to apologize. But all it takes is one look at his longtime crush and the ache is stronger than ever. Jamie has waited a long time for answers but walks away with only more questions. Can one night of sex ruin a friendship? If not, how about 6 more weeks of it? When Wesley turns up to coach alongside Jamie for one more hot summer at camp, Jamie has a few things to discover about his old friend and a big one to learn about himself. Okay, so this book, gosh, I love this writing duo. Serena Bowen and Elle Kennedy are just amazing, and their hockey romance books are incredible. But this one, to me, is by far the best. It's such a wonderful love story between two friends who end up being really vulnerable and open with each other, and it results in this just epic love story. The tension, oh my God, the tension between these two was palpable. I totally felt for Wes, who is trying to deny his feelings for a straight friend, but it's just so hard. No pun intended. And then there's Jamie, who is just so open and who begins exploring his own feelings towards Wes, and they are sort of dancing around each other while sharing a room at summer hockey camp, which just makes it a bit more enticing in a way. Their steamy scenes between these two were so freaking hot, but it's really their friendship and their connection that Kennedy and Bowen just wrote with perfection. I loved it, and I loved the follow-up novel, Us, just as much. This book is wonderful, but really stood out to me as one of the best romance books I've ever read and one of the best romance books of all time. So check it out. Next on my list is The Rivals by Vi Keeland. This is a fantastic enemies to lovers romance, and here is what it's about. The feud between Weston Lockwood and me started at the altar, only neither of us attended the wedding, and the nuptials happened decades before either of us was born. Our grandfathers had been best friends and business partners at least up until my grandfather's wedding day, when his bride-to-be blurted out she couldn't marry him because she was also in love with Weston's grandfather. The two men spent years fighting over Grace Copeland, who also happened to be their third business partner. But in the end, neither man could steal half of her heart away from the other. Eventually, they all went their separate ways. Our grandfathers married their other women, and the two men became one of the biggest business rivals in history. Our fathers continued the family tradition of feuding, and then Weston and I did too. For the most part, we kept as much distance as possible until the day the woman who started the feud died and unexpectedly left one of the most valuable hotels in the world to our grandfathers to share. Now I'm stuck in a hotel with the man I was born to hate, trying to unravel the mess our families inherited. As usual, it didn't take long for us to be at each other's throats. Weston Lockwood was everything I hated, tall, smart, cocky, and too gorgeous for his own good. We were fire and ice. But that shouldn't be an issue. Our families were used to being at war. There was just one minor problem, though. Every time Weston and I fought, we somehow wound up in bed. Oh my gosh, this book, and I forgot to check. I can't remember if I put this on my episode of Hot Hotel Sex. I probably did because it totally fits. So you can listen to that episode. But I included it here because it continued to feed my love of enemies to lovers romance books. And it's also one of the first books to hook me on heroes who were fantastic dirty talkers. I don't think, honestly, that type of characteristic really stood out to me in a romance novel until I read this book and met Weston. Good God. He earned the title of Best Dirty Talker for 2020 for good reason, because he was relentless with Sophia. From the moment of their first run-in, Weston and Sophia just exuded this strong sexual chemistry. Of course, this was fueled by a decades-long family feud and their ability to fling barbs and jabs at one another without fail. Each one of their interactions was filled with just the best back-and-forth banter that oozed sexual tension that finally then exploded in the hottest of hate sex. It didn't, there's nothing, original necessarily about the storyline, but the dialogue, the characters, and their family influences that drove them are what kind of made this book stand apart from the rest for me. It's really one of the best, and as I said, it's a must-read for all you dirty talker lovers out there. Another book that I talk about all of the time because it really solidified my love of the enemies to lovers trope as well is Truce by R.L. Mathewson. I talked about this book already in episode 44, which again was the best historical romance novels that I've ever read, so I won't go into too much detail here. But it is such a great romance where two characters tormented each other as children, and then they have this magical meet cute as adults where they don't recognize one another at first, and then their paths cross again where they just egg each other on, but now have this like brewing sexual tension and chemistry that just explodes in some really incredible passion and some really amazing scenes. They don't want to like each other or can't really believe that they are having these feelings for one another, which I think makes the fact that they can't keep their hands off of one another all of the more fun and exciting. Again, this is one of those books that I could reread time and time again. I absolutely loved it. So check out Truce by R.L. Mathewson. Okay, moving to another one of the best romance books of all time that I haven't talked about yet here on the podcast is After We Fall by Melanie Harlow. Now, Melanie has been cranking out small town romances as of late, and they are fabulous, but I love so many of her earlier releases, including this one, and here's what it's about. Jack Valentini isn't my type. Sexy, brooding cowboys are fine in the movies, but in real life, I prefer a suit and tie, proper manners, a close shave. Jack might be gorgeous, but he's also scruffy, rugged, and rude. He wants nothing to do with a rich city girl like me, and he isn't afraid to say so. But I've got a PR job to do for his family farm, so he's stuck with me, and I'm stuck with him. His glares, his moods, his tight jeans, his muscles, his huge, hard muscles. Pretty soon, there's a whole different kind of tension between us, the kind that has me misbehaving in barns, trees, and pickup trucks. I've never done anything so out of character, but it feels too good to stop. And the more I learn about the grieving ex-army sergeant, the better I understand him. Losing his wife left him broken and bitter and blaming himself. He doesn't think he deserves a second chance at happiness. But he's wrong. I don't need to be his first love if only he'd let me be his last. Oh my gosh, you guys. Where do I start with this book? I mean, I love both Jack and Margot so much in this book. It's the perfect opposites attract love story where you can really buy into their attraction and love for one another despite their apparent differences. So Jack, as you probably could tell from the summary, he has a lot of burdens and trauma weighing on his shoulders, so he doesn't react well to the dolled-up city girl who is hired to make some changes to his family farm that he doesn't want to happen. So it doesn't make for a great welcome in Margot's eyes, but she's not one to back down, especially since she's in need of a win in her life, and she eventually needles her way under his skin, and he unintentionally does the same right back to her. There is this scene in the book, gosh, it's my favorite. I mean, you could tell from the summary, they get it on in so many different random places, but where he finally lets himself have what he wants in a way that he wants it, it's the scene in her hotel room that I will always remember. It's so good and so hot. Just pick up the book just to read that scene. It's amazing. And while I'm fangirling over Melanie Harlow, I have to share another one of my favorites that I consider the best of all time because, and why I picked this book to mention today is it was the first romance book that I really remember reading that took a deep dive into a mental health issue and one that I wasn't familiar with, and that is Some Sort of Happy. Here is what it's about. Skylar Nixon. She's even more beautiful than I remember. 10 years ago, she was an impossible dream, and now she's right here in front of me, offering everything I ever wanted. But happiness never lasts, not for someone like me. I have to protect us both. Sebastian Price. He's the most complicated, frustrating, beautiful man I've ever met, and my body craves his with a hunger I've never known. My heart is completely his. Why won't he let me in? Oh my gosh. Okay, that summary doesn't really give it too much justice. I should have written one myself. But Sebastian, I think, is always going to be one of my favorite book boyfriends. I fell for this man so hard, let me tell you. I'm just going to say what his mental health disorder is, which I don't think is a spoiler, but if you're worried about it, you can just fast forward here 5 seconds. But he struggles with OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder, and the man does not want it affecting Skylar in the slightest. And my heart just sort of broke for this man, right, who wanted to hide this side of himself, but Skylar was just the perfect partner for him. I want to say that I read somewhere that Melanie drew in from some personal experience for this novel. I'm not really sure what exactly. I probably should have checked that before I said it, but I thought she did such a fantastic job of portraying a character with this mental health issue and how it impacts him and his relationships. I also loved how Sebastian and Skylar were classmates in high school, where she was like the beauty queen and he definitely was not Mr. Popular, but always had this crush on her. So their connection as adults was super sweet and steamy. And as I said, it's just an amazing look at a mood disorder that I've never read about in a book, and it was perfection. And it's definitely the book, too, that inspired me to write my list on She Reads Romance Books, the best romance books featuring mental health disorders. So you can check that list out if you're interested. The next book is one of my favorite second chance romance books, though I think my husband will argue with me time and time again about it being a romance. But I'm firmly in the camp that it is, and that is The Notebook by Nicholas Sparks. This book is right up there with Paradise as one of those first romance books I read that really, really stuck with me. The movie, of course, is incredible, too. They actually really did that book-to-movie adaptation well, I think. But this is one of the, best romance books of all time that you should definitely read, even if you've already read the movie. And I'm clearly not the only one to think so, because this book shot Nicholas Sparks' career into the stratosphere in every book he wrote since, pretty much. I talk about it in episode 1, Romance Books That Will Make You Ugly Cry, because I did just that, honestly, while reading it, and multiple times. There's just something about the young love of Allie and Noah, and then them being torn apart by her parents, and then Noah going off to war, and then him coming back to fulfill his promise of rebuilding one of those beautiful homes in the Carolinas for them. I loved when she finds out what he did, but my favorite part is sort of the speech that he gives about wanting her forever when she's about to leave. It was just epic, and I will forever love this book. The next book on my list made me a Christina Lauren fan for life, so I thought I would mention it again here. I just loved their beautiful series. All of their earlier work really, which is a bit more spicy, I'd say, for them, and really hooked me on binge reading series. But of that series, Beautiful Stranger is probably my all-time favorite. I mean, I loved Beautiful Bastard, but Beautiful Stranger was just like, oh my gosh. And I talk about this book on the podcast already multiple times in episode 8, where I share romance books where people have a specific kink. And again, in episode 34 on best exhibition books. So I probably won't go into it too much more here, but I obviously think so highly of it since I've mentioned it quite a few times. And I do, because this was really one of the first books that I read where I felt like the authors really normalized kink, or normalized that couples and people like intimacy in all types of packages. So for Sarah, she liked a bit of exhibitionism, and Max, oh man, he may be my favorite Brit, because he just gave her what she wanted and made her feel cherished and adored, and it was wonderful. Truly great writing and wonderful characters and a fabulous story, making this one of the best romance books of all time, hands down. Okay, the next book is an erotic romance that I've reread several times as well, and that is Wicked Envy by Sawyer Bennett. I don't think I mentioned it yet on the podcast, so here is what it's about. I've been known to get my kicks at the wicked horse, and I have no shortage of beautiful women waiting to get a shot at me. Driven to succeed, no matter if I'm in the boardroom or the bedroom, I am not one to back down from a challenge. What started as an idea has evolved into a multi-million-dollar enterprise I share with my two best friends, Avril Kerrigan and Andrew Collin. Avril isn't the type of woman to take risks in her personal life, but after a broken heart and too much liquid courage, she decides the best way to get over one man is to get under another. Looking to experience all the debauchery she's heard about, Avril makes a request that Andrew and I take her to the Wicked Horse. The request seems simple, friends helping one another in their time of need, but now that we've crossed the threshold, things aren't as easy as they once seemed. Now I see Avril in a new light, and I suspect Andrew feels the same. As my attraction grows, I have to wonder if I made the right decision when I agreed to introduce Avril to my wicked world. Now that the lines of friendship have blurred and boundaries have been crossed, I'm not sure our friendship will survive the jealousy threatening to tear it apart. Oh my gosh, people. Okay. This is book 3 in Bennett's Wicked Horse Vegas series, which includes several stories about the Wicked Horse Sex Club. I think her first Wicked Horse series is the first time I even read about a sex club in a romance book. So there's that. But this one is such a good friends to lovers romance. That's a menage romance that isn't polyamory. So I found it a bit different. It looks at the intricacies of friends who become lovers when it's 3 best friends, 2 guys and 1 girl. It was definitely a super hot erotic romance, but I loved it for the story and its characters. Dane, who is definitely the more alpha of the 2 guys, but Andrew wasn't really a pushover, and I loved that what he brought to the story too. And then Avril is this strong heroine who just went after what she wanted after getting her heart broken by her ex, and she really wouldn't settle for anything less than that. It truly is one of my favorite erotic romance books and one of my favorite menage romance books, and then obviously one of the best romance novels of all time. So if you haven't read it yet, check out Wicked Envy by Sawyer Bennett. Okay, I already talked about this next book in episode 10 of the podcast, where I mentioned my favorite romance books that feature hot hotel sex, and that is Cruel Paradise by J.T. Geisinger. Now, so many of her books are my favorites, but I always go back to this one because I love how character-based many of her novels are. This is one of her first mafia romance books, but there honestly isn't a lot of your, what traditional mafia world or work in it. Killian is the head of the mob and he falls for his enemy's daughter. But as I said, the book is really just all about Killian and Juliet. I mean, the fact that they're tied to the mafia really doesn't matter in a way, other than why she's hesitant to get involved with him. It is a bit of an insta-love story, but it just worked for me. And Killian is also one of those characters that pops up a lot in Geisinger's books. So it was just satisfying for him to have his own story, even though this can absolutely be read as a standalone. But yeah, it's just one of the best of all time because the writing was superb. It sucked me into character-driven romance books that gave me all the feels. I loved the book. I love JT's work. Definitely one of the best. All right. Oh my gosh, we're up to the last one that I thought I would mention. And that one is from Megan Quinn, and it is The Lineup. Looking back over my list of favorite romance novels, I don't have a ton of laugh out loud romance books on there. I mean, so many of them, just looking over the list made me cry at some point, which is probably why I felt so strongly about these books. But Quinn never fails really to make me chuckle, especially in a lot of her earlier work. I loved her Brentwood Boys baseball books, and honestly, it was kind of a toss-up whether to talk about The Lineup or The Dugout, but I'm going to go with The Lineup, I think, for today. But I loved them both, and they're both on my list of best of all time. Here is what The Lineup is about. Want to know a secret? It's about that girl over there. Don't look, but she's the one in the power suit, the long black hair, and the serious expression, the one I'm about to go on a date with. Yeah, according to her, she accidentally donated an obscene amount of money to my charity, The Lineup, to win said date, but I found out the truth. Miss Button-Up Blouse has a secret, passionate crush on me. I didn't know her name until 2 days ago, despite the friends we have in common. Was I oblivious? Probably. Was I blind to it? Definitely. But I'm no fool. I see it now. The high-heel harlot wants more than just a date with Jason Orson. She wants to be able to claim the best butt in baseball as hers. Here's another secret. She has no idea. I know. I must have really loved this book because looking back over my review, I wrote, I think in all caps, absolute perfection, one of the best books of 2019. And it's true because I loved everything about this book, and I'm about to reread it, I think, or reread it for multiple times now because I just never want to leave Jason Orson. And I think why I included this on the episode today is I think I can attribute Jason Orson to starting my obsession with book boyfriends. I had fallen for book boyfriends before, mainly, Jamie Fraser of Outlander. But after reading this book, I was like, man, I really fall for some amazing heroes in romance. And I need to keep track of all these hot guys that I'm just falling for. But not all are really amazing ones, but I crowned Jason as one of my all-time favorite book boyfriends, if not the favorite of all time, and I've been collecting them ever since, reading this book. I call him kind of the unicorn among men because he's almost like unreal in how perfect he is that someone like him couldn't possibly exist in real life. What I love most about Jason is that he is completely comfortable in his own skin. He's not afraid to bawl his eyes out or scream like a baby when he's confronted with a bear. He'll talk feelings with his boys like it's a complete girl gab fest, and he will admire his sculpted body and ass along with everyone else. He's also, the hottest dirty talker who also loves to cuddle after sex, and despite his sensitive side, he is just this hot alpha in the bedroom, knowing what he wants, and more importantly, knowing what and how his partner wants it and needs it. Seriously, I don't think I could crush on this boy any harder. Not only is he one hot baseball player, a giving philanthropist, and a friend, he also cooks. And oh my gosh, any man who cooks, you're golden on my list. So yeah, he's a unicorn, I tell you. Definitely unicorn. But that's not to say that I didn't also love Dottie just as much in this story. She's been hurt in the past, so even though she's had this secret crush on Jason and she wants to protect her heart, her hesitation is really no match for Jason. And for some reason, her eye rolling and her standoffish attitude is catnip for him, and he slowly wears down her walls. So this book made my best of all time list because I have never been so sucked into a book where I was just also laughing my ass off, at every turn. Her writing makes even the simplest of actions in a story so funny and unique. So if you like rom-coms or books that will make you laugh, then check out The Lineup. You won't regret it. And there you have it. Gosh, some of the best romance books of all time, according to this avid reader. It was sort of hard to pick which ones to talk about today, but I wanted to highlight a few that you could go back and check on other podcast episodes, as well as ones I haven't really talked about before. I highly, highly recommend adding them to your TBR list if there are any you haven't yet read. But as I said, if you want even more, don't forget to check out my entire list of best romance books of all time up on shereadsromancebooks.com. And you can also download that PDF of titles that I mentioned. Now I am off to do some more reading, always on the hunt for my next book boyfriend and the next book to try and make my list of best romance books of all time. Here is hoping that I find a few. Thank you so much for tuning in, and as always, happy reading, because life is better with a love story.
That's all for this episode of the She Reads Romance Books podcast. I hope you enjoyed it and found some new books to add to your TBR list. If you did, please subscribe, rate, and review the show on your favorite podcast app. It really helps me reach more romance book lovers like you, and I appreciate your support. If you're a book boyfriend collector like me, then you'll want to join my email list so you never miss a podcast episode or a new book list. Just visit shereadsromancebooks.com/join and sign up today. As a thank you, I'll instantly send you my list of top 10 book boyfriends that will make you swoon. Trust me, you don't want to miss this list. Thank you for listening, and until next time, happy reading.